And finally tonight, a real-life tale of crime on the high seas off the Horn of Africa. Ray Suarez has our book conversation.
3 years ago, Somali pirates caught the world's attention, capturing large oil tankers and cargo ships, as well as private yachts, for hefty ransoms. A centuries-old but forgotten practice of piracy was back in the news. In response, a group of maritime nations committed to fight piracy and deployed their navies over several thousand square miles of ocean. Journalist Jay Bahadur spent 3 months in northeast Somalia getting to know modern-day pirates and talking to government officials about their exploits. In The Pirates of Somalia, inside their hidden world, he explores their tactics and why they've been able to flourish. And Jay Bahadur, a young, relatively inexperienced reporter, goes to one of the most dangerous places on the planet, self-assigned. And was there a point at which you thought, this was a bad idea?
It was mostly on the plane over there that I had the most trepidation about it, because I knew that if the people on the other end didn't pick me up, I would have about half an hour before I would be maybe not kidnapped by pirates, but kidnapped by somebody. And a lot of journalists actually, relatively recently, before I arrived, some British journalists had actually been captured out of the airport by their own bodyguards. So I had a partner there, but I had never met him. I didn't know anything about him really deep down. Spoken to him on the phone a few times. So I was on the plane over there. I was desperately trying to make friends with anyone who would speak to me, so I could have someone to take me home in case my ride didn't show. So that was really the worst of it.
Piracy on the high seas evokes exotic, exciting, daring, violent images, but the day-to-day reality of these men's lives, as you portray in your book, seems very different.
They're not, they're not the bloodthirsty pirates you think of when you think of 17th century buccaneering. And the main character I embedded with for about 3 months, as you mentioned, was a former fisherman named Boya. That was his nickname anyway. And he and his men were all former fishermen. They were the original wave of fishermen pirates who had begun fighting against foreign fishing in the 1990s. They weren't murderers. I mean, you know, they were scary guys, but they weren't murderers. The pirates you see out there now are becoming increasingly bloody, increasingly violent, and don't hesitate to use torture and that kind of thing.
You talk about millions of dollars being realized as ransom for some of these captured ships, seized on the high seas, brought into a Somalian port. When that couple of $million comes ashore in this Puntland place, how does it get divvied up? Who's in for a share, and how much money are we talking about?
Right. Well, the ransoms themselves are often actually not delivered by hand, but actually parachuted down from small aircraft that just dump it on the ship or nearby the ship and leave, and then the pirates immediately rush and go pick up the package. And there's an accountant on board who has an Excel sheet with how everyone's named on it and how much they're owed. But roughly speaking, and I hesitate to give any concrete numbers because this trade is really very, very opaque. It's hard to know exactly what's going on, but it's rough. The financiers roughly take 50% of it. So if you fronted the money, you'll get 50% back, and it'll be split up proportionally to what you've put in.
So the guys who took the risk aren't getting very much money at all.
In fact, in the book, I look in depth at a gang that captured a German container ship when I was in Somalia. And the guards, they're called holders, the ones who were brought on just to guard the hostages once the ship had been captured, spent a large part of their lives for 2 months on this ship, over 2 months, and made about $10 an hour. The cook on the ship made something just over $5. And even in Somalia, that money doesn't go very far if you have friends and relatives willing to or ready to sap you and drain you dry for what you've just made.
Is this dangerous work? Is this risky work? Do these guys jump into these high-speed boats with some confidence that nobody up there on that big cargo ship is going to start shooting back?
Well, the risks aren't from the crew shooting back, because largely the international maritime community has decided against, collectively essentially, against the arming of the merchant marine, which carries many other problems with it. But really what they have to worry about is, well, international naval forces, obviously, but that's not even the worst. The worst is just simply running out of fuel and starving. when I mentioned this gang that I was following closely, from first-hand accounts of how much fuel they had on board when they set off into the Gulf of Aden, I calculated that they didn't have enough to get back, which means you're going out there and just, hoping. And if you don't find a ship, you're hoping then that you just get picked up by a naval ship or something, because you're running out of water and food. So they might have a few weeks of food and water and not very much fuel at all.
The world recoils from this kind of thing, in part because if you mess up the shipping of the world, everybody loses. I mean, there's a lot of goods out on the ocean at any one time. But you also mention in your book that the world is spending like $1.5 billion to solve a $75 million problem.
I would call it the most coordinated international naval effort in human history. You have ships from as diverse countries as China, Malaysia, Russia, United States, obviously, Britain, Iran, all converging on the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden for essentially the same purpose. So you have every country is thinking the same way. You have a very, very high level of cooperation amongst the different countries and the different fleets. But ultimately, it's just not, economically, it doesn't make sense what they're doing.
The pirates of Somalia inside their hidden world. Jay Bahadur, thanks a lot.
It's my pleasure.